Hello class. In this video I wanted to go over the syllabus for SER422, the Web Application Programming course in spring of 2019. As mentioned in an email to you, I will not be present the first week of class. We'll have no in-person class on January 8th or January 10th. Our first in-person class will be on January 15th. I don't want to spend more time going over the syllabus in class. I want to get right to material. So therefore, I'm recording this video so you review the syllabus and get the explanation from me about the syllabus content and the way the course will work separate in the video. Certainly you can ask me questions over email or on the Canvas discussion forums, community forums tool. And I'll answer questions the first day I'm back on January 15th. However, the intent here is to not have to spend a significant amount of class time reviewing the syllabus so we can get right into material when we have our first in-person class, which again, January 15th. So anyway, welcome to SER422 Web Application Programming. A lot of you who are undergraduates will have taken SER421, but it is not a strict prerequisite of the course. In fact, you'll notice some of the material, especially in the beginning of the course, is actually repeated from 421 to give us the same foundation, particularly things related to HTTP, as you might expect. This course is about web applications, languages, frameworks, technologies, tools, and methods used to realize web client and server solutions, approaches for securing, testing, as well as determining the quality and reliability of web applications. In reality, to me, this course, and I'll talk a little bit at the end as well, but what this course is really about, the theme I use in this course, if you will, is server-side APIs and integration, services-oriented computing, if you will. So we're going to spend about a first third of the class going through the Java stack for servlet-based development, that component and container-based development. The other two-thirds of the class, though, is going to get into services, APIs, REST, traditional web services, microservices, and then into some, if you will, modern topics on container computing, cloud-based computing, and the like, and how that impacts the nature of how web applications are developed nowadays. So that's basically what this course is about. Again, 421 is not a prerequisite. However, SCR 321 is. I do expect that you're going to be familiar and comfortable with distributed computing concepts, in particular threads and sockets. More on that to come, though. Let me go through the syllabus. First, in case we haven't met, I'm Dr. Kevin Gary. I'm an associate professor and program chair in software engineering. I teach in the web and mobile focus area and have for years. I've taught this course a number of times. The email address that you see there is my preferred email address for the course. I have another email address that you would find on a directory system, but use this one and put SCR422 in the subject line so I see your email. As program chair, I get a lot of noise in my email. I get a lot of emails a day. If you send it to my other email address, my asu.edu one, it may get lost. So if you want to guarantee a response and guarantee a timely response, and I'm going to see it, please use that email address. Additionally, we use Zoom as a video conferencing client. So if you can't make my office hours, or we have an outside appointment time or something like that, and you can't get to campus, I would ask you to get on Zoom at that address, and then you see there's an address for the course down where the teaching assistant is as well. And we can screen share on there and so forth, so we can do all kinds of troubleshooting and debugging if we need to. My office is in Peralta 230C, second floor. Our class meets from 9 to 10:15 a.m. Our classroom is Peralta 213 on the second floor, around the corner from where my office is. We are going to be using Canvas this year, not Blackboard, so it's going to take a little adjustment period, but we're together in class a couple times a week, so we'll work through that. Your TA is, for those of you from 421, is the same TA you had in SCR 421, Ayushi Shah, and please use the class email account that you see there over Gmail. Please do not look up Ayushi's personal ASU email and use that. I insist that my TAs not be bothered personally, if you will, with their TA responsibilities. So please use the class account and the class Zoom account if you need to meet with her. I do not have her office hours yet. I will get those, and those will be forwarded to you and posted on the Canvas website. I will be having office hours right after class on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 10:30 to noon. Um, in terms of getting back to what the course is about, and the course objectives and expected learning outcomes are first, and what you see there in parentheses, by the way, are mappings to our program outcomes. The software engineering program actually just revised its program outcomes to be in line with new um, program outcomes for engineering programs as specified by ABET. If you don't know who ABET is, they are the accreditation body nationally for engineering programs, and you earn an engineering degree as software engineers, undergraduates. So these mappings deal with the new ABET 1 through 7 engineering mappings, as well as a couple custom outcomes that the faculty have defined called SER1 and SER2, and these will be up shortly on our website, on the SIDC website for the software engineering program. First outcome, demonstrate technical competency in developing web applications on the server side. This is a programming class. And so technical competency, you are going to have a significant part of your grade I'll talk about in a minute as programming labs. Straightforward, you have to learn how to code these things. You have to learn how to understand and design them, which is course outcome 2. Design and implement server-side APIs and integration architectures. That's kind of the services-oriented feel, if you will, and you're going to have to understand design principles and implementation skills for APIs, services-oriented computing, and other forms of integration architectures. Course outcome 3, apply principles of software engineering in a web application context, including but not limited to software testing, performance and scalability optimization, security, and quality processes. I want to get to all these software engineering topics in the context of web development. Again, it's what separates your degree program from just a programming course, if you will, or just a computer science course. It's applying those software engineering principles both in terms of design and the design process and the quality assurance processes, and the engineering approach to creating production-ready websites and web APIs and integration architectures. So I hope to spend more time on that than I was really able to in SER421. Course outcome 4, distinguish and illustrate principles of software design for service-oriented architectures and integration. So again, an emphasis in particular from a services perspective on the design outcome. And then course outcome 5, describe the structure of enterprise development organizations and the role of the modern developer. I always feel, particularly since I'm dealing with seniors and graduate students, those of you who are close to going out and getting that industry job may look at working in web architectures as the place that you want to have your job in, that you kind of understand how development organizations are set up, what your role is as a modern developer, and kind of what it's like, if you will. And I actually have some guest speakers lined up for late in the semester to talk about some of these things in context as well. Okay, so that's what the learning outcomes are about. Let's talk about some of the machinery here. Particularly, you're probably wondering, how do I get my grade? You will have a programming lab, about every other week. There'll be 6 or 7 of them. I haven't decided yet which, so I just wrote 6 to 7 assigned labs. I'm going to count the top 5. That means for 45% of the course grade, each of the counted top 5 is going to be worth 9% of your grade. You're going to get handouts on what these things are. We go over them in class. Those of you who have me before know how I do this. The lab assignments will focus on programming, but may have additional activities. I may ask you to write some unit tests or do a performance and scalability evaluation, things like that. Now, by having 6 to 7 labs and only counting the top 5, that means I'm going to drop 1 or 2 of them. But I'm going to tell you, the thing that makes me uncomfortable about dropping. The reason for dropping a grade is, I give hard labs. I give hard labs intentionally. I'm trying to make you ready for industry, if you will. So I won't claim that my labs are easy, and a lot of the technology will be used. This is a very technology-centric course, just like SER421, perhaps even more so. More tools, more environments, and these things can be time-consuming. They can be frustrating to deal with, and I fully understand that. But I kind of believe you have to go through that in order to be technically proficient, as I'm trying to prepare you to be. some of these may be too hard, or you misplan your time, or whatever happens. So I like to be a little forgiving and give you that one that you can drop. But it's not my intent to give you one that you can just blow off and not do at all. So I have a policy I put in all caps here because this is different than SER421. In SER421, I didn't even let you say I would let you drop one until partway through the semester. I didn't even put it in the syllabus. So here I'm putting in the syllabus, but I'm putting the caveat that for you to have your lowest score drop, that lowest score must be at least a 30%. Meaning I'm not going to take a zero, and I got to take some, reasonable effort. All right, so you made an effort. You're frustrated. You couldn't get the code to work. You couldn't get the deployment environment to work. But it's clear that you spent the effort on doing it. If I know you made a good effort on it and you just couldn't get it going, that's really the criteria I'm after here. I'll go ahead and drop that lowest one and allow you to do another one. This is also the case that even if you do the first 5 labs and get 100%, I don't want you blowing off labs 6 and 7. I want you to make an effort on them because these labs are where you're going to learn a lot. They're not just there to assign your grade. You're going to learn as much doing the labs as you are from listening to me lecture in class. Probably a lot more, to tell you the truth, because this is a learn by doing discipline. You got to get your fingers dirty. I just believe in that. In any event, make sure I'll probably bring this up the first day we're back, but make sure you understand that policy. I want to see you make legitimate efforts, but be a little forgiving because I know these labs are difficult and complex. Assignments and quizzes, I do give smaller in-class assessments. Again, those of you who took SER 421 with me are aware of what these things are. They may be surprise quizzes. They may be small outside of class things. They may be small in-class things. I will typically give what do we do in 421? Like 9 of these or 10 of these? I'll give several more than 5 of them, but I'll keep the top 5. So again, I'll be dropping grades in this category for things that are missed or things that are not you did not do well on. But my in-class assessments, particularly my quizzes, my surprise quizzes, they're no cakewalk. You have to be keeping up with the material. I am a believer. I do have an expectation that my students, when I do a lecture in class, or if I ask you to watch a video or ask you to read something, that you've done it and that you've studied it, preferably in a group, and that you're prepared when I think you should be prepared, meaning have completed that activity, to take a pop quiz, that you're keeping up, that you're not just reviewing the material the night before, the midterm or final exam. I expect that you are reviewing the content of the course outside of class after we go over it, right after we go over it, to keep it fresh and get it grounded in your brains. And that's where this in-class assessment comes from. It is a 15% mechanism to try and get you to keep up. And not just say, oh, I think I'll sleepwalk through a lecture and then just go do the lab homework and that's it. I want you keeping up with the content in an active, engaged way, and that's why these assignments and quizzes exist. I'm going to give 2 exams, a midterm, which I have tentatively scheduled. I expect to give it that Thursday before spring break. That's Thursday, February 28th, in class. And then the second exam I'll give in class on the last day of class. The reason I give an in-class exam at the end of class is if you look at our scheduled exam time, final exam time during finals week, it is actually on Thursday, May 2nd at 7:30 in the morning. I really wouldn't expect I could get students here at 7:30 in the morning and have them fully engaged and awake. And I know for the graduate students who will be taking this course, that most of you will get on a shuttle. You'd be having to get on a 6 a.m. shuttle, if there is one, just to get out here for the exam on time. So in any event, my expectation there is that wouldn't be a good thing, and so I'm going to give the final exam in class on April 25th. Grade appeals, standard grade appeal policy. You have a right to appeal a grade in writing. That in writing includes by email to that email address above. Email it to me, not to the TA. Anything about a grade on a lab or whatever goes to me. It doesn't go to the TA. You don't go see the TA and say, if I want the TA to be involved, I'll involve her. If you need an explanation of, why these points or why it didn't work, you don't go to the TA directly. You first come to me. You do it in writing via an email. We take a look if we need to talk to you directly. I mean, don't come to my office hours either. Write me an email. And again, if we need to follow up and meet individually, I'll ask you to come by, or I will ask you to meet with the TA if that's what's required to resolve the issue. I don't mind grade appeals, but I'm very picky about the way they're conducted. I insist on that process, and I also insist on you saying exactly what points are in dispute, not just in general, I think I should have done better. I get one thing I'm going to mention about the programming labs. Um, I put it up here actually. Programming labs must compile, deploy, and execute to earn a reasonable score. We will not debug and modify your submissions. I did this in 421. I do it every time in this class. Any programming class I teach, I always tell students, turn in something that runs. You're better off implementing half of the functionality and having it be stable than trying to make 80% of the functionality, but you're not quite sure how stable it is, or making a last minute change. I'm not, students get annoyed, I know, but I'm not very sympathetic to, well, the last minute change is what got me. I was really only one line off. If you change this line to that line, everything works just fine. We're not going to modify your code. We don't debug it. We don't modify. And a one-line error that makes your program bomb is still a program failure. It doesn't matter that it's one line or 100 lines that are wrong. It's a program failure. You're not at a point that it's an A for effort. This is about having the technical proficiency and the engineering mindset to turn in engineered software that works, that compiles, that deploys according to instructions and build scripts, and executes and goes through the test cases in a clear manner. We're not here to figure it out anymore. Again, you're seniors and graduate students. I don't know that I would do that to freshmen, but I do it to seniors and graduate students. Please don't file an appeal or come to me with a complaint saying, hey, yeah, my program bombed, but it was only one line, just change this. You're still going to get a 0. Well, you're going to get close to a 0. You're going to get a very poor grade and one that you can't drop because of it. So don't put a lot of work at jeopardy. I don't enjoy getting the emails or having the conversations where a student said, hey, I had a whole bunch of this done. I could probably see that they did, but it just bombed at the last minute because I was trying to do one more thing at 11:58 at night before the 11:59 submission time. Don't be that person. Build things in an engineering way, incremental, update your unit tests, make sure it works, get it stable, move on to the next thing, and turn in something that's stable. Don't make last minute changes that bomb your program, because you will get a poor score, and that poor score is going to stick because it's going to be below that 30% threshold. Okay, that's a warning. There it is, and I'll refer back to it if you come into my office during the semester with that kind of complaint. That's just the way it is. I insist on that. You're soon to be real world engineers. Okay, enough of that. Absence of makeup policies. I don't have a mandatory attendance policy. You don't come to class, don't come to class. But I do not give makeups under assignments and quizzes. If you miss one of these in-class assessments that was a surprise quiz, there's going to be no makeup for it. Outside of something that's a medical doctor signed excuse or a religious observance. Religious observance, however, you're supposed to tell me at the start of the semester. I should get an email from you at the first day of classes saying, according to my religion, in this religious calendar, the following dates I will not be present in class, and I am obligated, if I'm giving an in-class assessment or an exam, or have a submission date for a lab, to give you an extension, and I happily will. Same thing, medical excuse, fine, but you need you need a doctor's note in order to do that. But in general, I'm going to be, as I said, dropping several of these assignments and quizzes. I'll give 7, 8, 9, 10 of them. So that's kind of your built-in in case you don't make class for whatever reason. Please don't send me an email beforehand saying, oh, my car broke down, I'm not going to make class today. Oh, I feel sick, but I'm not going to go to the doctor. Can you please tell me if there, could you tell me ahead of time if there's going to be a quiz? I don't do that. I'm not even going to respond to those emails. I'm just going to delete them. That's just my policy when it comes to attendance in the in-class assessments. Readings, I don't have a textbook for the course. I do occasionally give readings, a lot like SER421. We had just a couple readings to do in there. There'll be a couple readings in this class, but beyond that, I'm not big on required readings. I will post my notes for the class, however. Um, you do need, to be using Chrome or Firefox. You are going to use a fair amount of software. You're going to need administrative rights to your computer and to know how to work that. Realize sometimes students who are running Windows in this course have problems with Windows firewalls or other settings. I expect that you know your computer inside and out, your personal computing environment. You're going to be installing something called Tomcat. You're going to be installing Spring Boot. You're going to be installing other open source software. You're going to be using Ant and Gradle probably. You're going to be using Docker later in the semester and related tools, and I expect that you know how to install tools to manage them. The other thing I'm going to mention about tools while I'm on it is I expect that you understand how programs run, meaning you can use Eclipse, you can use NetBeans, but you're going to have to understand how to deploy your software and troubleshoot the runtime environment without just pressing a button in an IDE and having it come up and run. Sometimes I get great appeals where a student says, well, here's how I ran. I went to Eclipse, I said, run it under the server, and it ran under my server. So I didn't realize I had something hard coded in there, or hardwired, because it worked under Eclipse. I don't accept that as a basis for a great appeal. You need to get comfortable on the command line. You need to understand what that IDE is doing for you every step of the way. It's not that I mind an IDE, but you really need to know what's going on underneath the hood. And I'm going to insist on that, and I'm not really going to grant a great appeal based on it worked in my IDE, but it doesn't work in the command line kind of thing due to some incidental hard coding or whatnot. And again, that can be a severe penalty. That could be something where your program will not work for us because you have a buried setting from your IDE, and then you wind up getting a very low grade that we won't drop. I'm telling you up front, we will not accept a grade appeal in that situation. The impetus and expectation is on you to make sure your program is portable in terms of its compilation, deployment, and execution. Okay. In terms of things in the class, activities of the class, more topics of what the class is about. The first is a brief review, an optional review of thread sockets and protocols. Again, this is the stuff from SER321. I have a review video on it I'll make available. I don't give an assignment on it, but I expect that you've done that stuff. I've expected that you've worked with a database before. So that kind of stuff is review. Those of you from SER421 have been exposed to my material on HTTP. I will be putting that out week 1 as our first topic. And again, for those of you who did not take SER421, you'll need to spend a little bit longer going through it because that will be brand new to you. And I do expect that you will go through it by watching a video and asking questions when I return. We will use Java as a programming language in this class, and specifically we will be using Java 8. Please do not use Java 9. If you have Java 9, you can actually compile to Java 8. And be aware, because there are some APIs that will not work under that are new in Java 9 that are popular that will not work backporting to Java 8. So please make sure you're writing code that is Java 8 compatible. So let's review some of the things. What we'll get into in the first of the course is really web application development in the component container framework. You'll write a servlet-based web application. You'll do one with the MVC pattern. You'll do one with sessions or stateful programming, things that again are going to be conceptual review from SER421, but obviously you're doing it in a new technology stack, so the technology will be a little bit different. I'm going to incorporate some design patterns and approaches for using a database. This time behind in SER421, we really just use the file system. Here we're going to use a database at one point and talk about design patterns for how you can organize your code. If we have time, we'll talk about something called object relational mappers, ORMs, but at the very least we'll do design patterns for that. As I said, I want to get to some of the software engineering aspects, performance, scalability, optimizations, and so forth. And then an overview of web application frameworks. Even on the Java side, the client side nowadays with JavaScript, there's a ton of web application frameworks, going in and out of popularity and revised all the time, and it's very difficult to keep up. Java not as much anymore, but we certainly had our period on the server side where this was the case. Most folks who are doing Java-based development on the server side, and there's still an awful lot of it, by the way, are using Spring. So we will do Spring Boot for a week and incorporate that into one of our labs. And I'll just talk a little bit about just the evolution of web application frameworks in the Java stack. But then we're going to get into the back 2/3 of the class. We'll spend a good few weeks on REST. I try and do a pretty deep dive on REST. We'll use Jersey Jack's RS reference implementation. We'll talk about the true full-blown nature of HTTP and the RESTful principles behind it. We'll talk about Fielding's dissertation. That's one of the papers that you'll read. It'll be Fielding's ACM paper based on his dissertation, one of the chapters of his dissertation, really. We'll talk about something called the Richardson maturity model for different levels of API maturity from a RESTful standpoint. We'll talk about the semantic formats. How do you format the JSON that's going back and forth to have more semantics? We'll talk about things like HAL, maybe JSON LD, maybe some other formats like that. We'll talk about why they are and why they're important. If I have time this year too, I might get into non-RESTful web APIs. REST, we'll talk about, has a very specific technical connotation, about resources and representations and so forth. It's kind of a noun-based API design approach, if you will. There are still web APIs out there that will appear on websites that are more behavior-oriented or functionally oriented. So we may talk about that. I'd like to talk about that some when we get to API part as well. We'll talk about services-oriented computing. We'll talk about the traditional web services stack, the SOAP, WSDL, UDI. We'll talk about ESBs. To the extent that we do a lab in it, I'm not sure. We'll talk about messaging frameworks. We may very well do a messaging-oriented integration lab in this class. And then we'll move forward in integration architectures, if you will, to the present day where folks are talking an awful lot about microservices and containers. And microservice containers aren't even really at the same conceptual level. Microservices is a architectural principle for services-oriented computing that we'll talk about. Containers are probably the most prevalent way that those things are realized nowadays. So we will do some container-based computing using Docker. I may even try and push that up earlier in the semester. Certainly, if you're not familiar with Docker and you have time at the beginning of the semester, go out and get it, start playing around with it, because we will be using it this semester. I'm going to try and get into cloud and serverless, things like event-driven programming, alternatives to the MVC pattern, Lambdas, AWS Lambda, and similar offerings on Google Cloud and Azure. To the extent that we can. Java may not be the best language for that, but you can do it. We have done it before, so we'll talk a little bit about that. And as I said, as a software engineering class, I'm going to try and do a better job and allocate more time to talking about things like unit testing, continuous testing and deployment, how the software development organization looks like, particularly when you're partitioning with API and services separate from applications, notions of performance and scalability and what these mean, and how you can test for them and evaluate them. Both legacy ones and, if you will, kind of more modern ones related to how web application architectures have changed over time. There'll be a bunch of sample code again. Those of you who took SER421, it'll be familiar. I think I have a significant number of servlet-based examples. Same thing with REST APIs and the like, and so I'll expect that you're spending time outside of class running through the sample code. If you have questions on it, asking in class or coming to office hours, and that you really start with that sample code before you try and jump into a complex new development. These implementations you'll be asked to do in the labs using these variety of technologies will be at least as complex as SER421 was if you took that course. So prepare yourself to get an early start on labs, and prepare yourself to go off and take a look at sample code, and mess around. Get those hands dirty. It will pay off more as the labs become due. Classroom behavior, that's just a standard section on it. Obviously, I expect you not to be rude in the class, and if you have a phone call, to please step outside if you need to take the call. Academic integrity is the same policy from SER 421, but for those new to here, again, you'll be doing, in some cases, I may allow some paired up labs. You'll be doing a lot of individual labs. So individual means individual. It means if you see someone else's code, use someone else's code, either in the class, from past instances of the class, from sites like Course Hero, or even if you get code from GitHub, Stack Overflow, a Google search somewhere. That's not allowed. Now, sometimes we look up solutions, or we try and get over the hump on a specific problem with Google and Stack Overflow. I understand that. I require you to have a reference. If you use a snippet of code, or you got the resolution on Stack Overflow, I want a link right in the code and in your README for the lab that tells me that you found part of your solution doing it that way. Realize I design my labs such that I don't expect that you're just going to go out to Google or Stack Overflow and find the entire lab, right? You have to I think of Google and Stack Overflow as, it used to be that the standard reference, I mean, you can come into my office, shelves of developers, programming books on specific technology stacks. If I had a problem with a C program, I opened up the white K&R book, looked at the specification of standard I/O or standard lib in the back, and that's how I get my answer. But or I look in a textbook for an example of how it's used, and I'd work off of that. Nowadays let's run to Google and Stack Overflow and use it as the reference manual. It's not. I don't mind. I use those resources when I have a specific problem and I know what I'm looking for. I have a bigger problem when someone doesn't really know what they're looking for, and they're kind of randomly going out and typing in keywords from the lab and slamming in bits and parts of code without understanding what it means. I do expect that even if you use attributed code from somewhere else, that you understand what that code does. And if I quiz you on it and you don't, then I'm going to not allow you to use that code. We're going to remove it from your lab. If you have any questions on whether or not you're using too much code from a Google or Stack Overflow, the impetus is on you to come and ask. Come to office hours, show me what you're doing, show me what you got, or put it on a discussion forum. We did this a lot in 421. Same thing when you use a third-party library for something. Don't try and solve everything with third-party libraries. My courses are about learning how to do things yourself underneath the hood. So the assumption is that it's all your code from day one and from the get-go. If you use an external library, you use external code, first, without attribution, it's automatically an academic integrity violation. And secondly, if you use too much of it, I'm going to have a problem with it as well. And you come and you ask me to get clarification. It's on you. The expectation is that you clarify, not that, I think I'll send in 75% of a lab that I found on Stack Overflow, and that I think that meets the criteria, and don't ask, right? When I have a problem with it and I don't count that lab and I reduce your course letter grade and you file an appeal on it, I'm going to say, look, I told you, the impetus is on you to clarify whenever it is you're borrowing, if you will, someone else's solution. Okay. I'm not very sympathetic on academic integrity violations. If you cheat, I'm going to have a big problem with it. You'll find I'm not very sympathetic on it. I'd rather work out a solution some other way. The first penalty for a first violation of any kind, no matter how small, is a reduction of the course letter grade. It's not a 0 for the assignment. It's not a zero, for the lab. It's not a failure. It is a reduction of a course letter grade. So I'll calculate your end of semester grades, and if you got a C, I'm going to reduce it to a D. And if that means you repeat the course, then so be it. If you do it a second time, then it will be failure from the course. I send every academic integrity violation up to the dean's office, and the dean's office has a 2-strike policy. They can remove you from the university after 2 cheating instances or academic integrity violations in any courses across the university. So if you already have one of those, don't do it in my class, because I'm pretty good at finding them. All right, disability accommodations. If you have such accommodations, please talk with the DRC and send me the appropriate notifications. Additional notices doesn't really have anything important in there. I don't expect to change this syllabus at all, so don't worry about it. The standard ABOR sexual discrimination section. If I witness it, I am obligated to report it, and I would say that also goes for any kind of discrimination in the class. Uh, Racial, spiritual, religious discrimination, sexual discrimination, gender, you name it. If I see it, I'm going to report it. And you're going to have somebody coming and talking to you. If you have a problem of any kind, please come see me confidentiality, or you can see the link there to Issues Counseling Services. All right, in terms of additional course information, the formal prereq for this class you have had to have taken is SER421. It's helpful if you took 421, but it's not a strict prerequisite. And again, for 421 students, a lot of the stuff, particularly in the first third of the course, is going to feel very familiar. Perhaps just in a different technology stack. You have to have an attitude toward programming that you like to do it because you're going to be spending time doing it. This is a time-consuming course, all right? The standard ASU model is 2 hours of study outside of class for every 1 hour in class. That would imply 6 hours of homework a week in this class. I would say you're going to spend closer to 9 to 12 hours a week in homework in this class. At least, because it is a programming class and the programming problems are meant to be complex. It is not by accident. So you have to have an attitude toward programming and plan your time accordingly. You should know how to use common algorithms and data structures from SER222. You should be comfortable with new language syntax. Again, Java may be familiar, but you'll have new tools, and you'll also have some syntax of, say, deployment descriptors and build scripts that I expect you to be able to dig into. And be comfortable with object orientation. Servlets are a component container model. They are, to me, much more object oriented than, let's say, the asynchronous functional programming model we did in SER421. So you need to be familiar with that. And again, sockets, thread, and distributed computing concepts are things that should be familiar to you from SER321 and 334. And I can't tell you how many times I'd walk into the first day of SER422 and have students look at me with blank faces like they can't remember what went on in 321. Well, if that applies to you, use the first week when we don't meet in class to go review it. Again, I'll put a review out there on distributed computing and threads and sockets. You need, particularly in the servlet environment, to understand a multi-threaded environment, what thread safety means, and what sockets are. You need to understand these OO concepts. Much more important in SER422, I'd say. I mentioned before, you have to have an ability to administer your computing environment. We're going to use a variety of tools, but you also have to understand how things work and be comfortable on the command line. If you're an IDE only type person and you don't really know what's going on, spend again the first week getting your fingers dirty on the command line, understand how things are actually working in your IDE, because we're going to do things in this class where the IDE is not going to be sufficient to save you, if you will. All right. And there's an expanded description, but that's redundant. I've already talked a lot about all these things along the way, as I mentioned. Excuse me. The intent of this class, once we get past the Java stack and doing some of the common server-side web application stuff, the real intent of this class is to get to APIs, services, traditional services, messaging, microservices, containers, and cloud. That stuff's new. That stuff's fun. Despite doing it in Java, the principles apply across a range of server-side technologies, including the SER421 stuff we did in Node.js. All those things will reapply in those kinds of environments, and I think that's what will make this course entertaining. I look forward to it. I'll see you in person on January 15th. Please look on Canvas for some things we want you to do, particularly set up Tomcat and come in and show the TA the first week of class, and be ready to go on January 15th. See you then.